All right, we welcome everybody again here tonight, and we are continuing our series called 66 Books in 52 Weeks, and that's a journey through the entire Bible during the year 2021. And tonight we have made it up to the book of Ecclesiastes, but actually tonight we're going to do two books, Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon. So let's just move through here and get those two. Get the first one here, the book of Ecclesiastes, just by the summary there, and I'll zoom in for those that are at home so you can see here. So let me move it to this. So the book of Ecclesiastes, it's the 21st book in the Old Testament. It's got 12 chapters in it, and it is a wisdom, a poetry book, and we talked a little bit last 2 weeks about what poetry in the Bible, or Hebrew poetry, and how it's set up. We've also talked about wisdom and Proverbs and those types of things. This is a wisdom book that just teaches a lesson. It is written in the form of poetry, and so the next part on this is you've got an outline here, the color outline there. We've got the way that it's put it there. We've got section 1 is what is meaningless and what is meaningful, and then section 2, a season for all, and stuff more things that are meaningless. This you'll understand this more as we go through it. We have some admonishments, some encouragements, and then finally the conclusion of the matter. And you can take a look at that if you've downloaded these outlines here. You can take a look at that a little bit closer, but we'll look at that ourselves here in our own little outline that we've got here. So that is an overview just of what it is of going through those 12 chapters. Now, if we were going to say what would be the key verse, I would say from the last chapter of the book, Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 13, he comes down to this, and the writer says, "Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind." So that would be the key knowledge of this here. So let's just go through a little bit. We'll talk about first of all who the title and who the author is. The title comes from the writer identifying himself as the preacher. So the word Ecclesiastes comes from a Greek word indicating a person who calls an assembly, and so that's what that word is, the idea of a preacher, one who calls an assembly. Now, no specific names in the book are given as to who wrote the book, but the writer does identify himself as a son of David. Now, that could mean some different things, but he also identifies himself as a king, and he speaks of vast wisdom, and he speaks of pursuits of pleasure. Who do you think that might be? All points to Solomon there. It points to his accomplishments, wealth, and again, most scholars feel that Solomon wrote this towards the end of his life, having time to reflect. And as folks here from HCC, you know Coach Clancy always says, you live life forward and you understand it backwards. And here is Solomon lived his life forward. Ecclesiastes is his understanding it backwards and having the final perspective here. So this brings us to the subject matter of this book. So Ecclesiastes deals with the futility of trying to live and enjoy life apart from God. And that's where you get that term meaningless throughout this book. So it's the idea of it's living life apart from God and how that is just futile to try to do that. And so there are 4 realities that dominate this book. And on your outline there, if you want to jot these down, the first reality is this: God is the single indisputable reality. And so beyond God, that is the most important part of life, of eternity, of all existence, is the knowledge of God. And then with an understanding of God, as we understand that He is God and we are not, and so God's ways are not always understandable. And we have to, at times, just trust that he knows best. That's where we get from the book of Job. The book of Job goes through all of this. God asks all these questions and understands that we don't really understand on this side of eternity what God's will is and why things happen the way they do. Maybe like the old song says, we'll understand it all by and by. Farther along, we'll understand it all by and by. A third reality is this: on the human side, what is done, and the quote is, under the sun, is simply not tidy. Much of it just doesn't add up at all. Under the sun. This is the thing that Solomon again and again calls meaningless. Under the sun, meaningless. And then the great equalizer of all of us is death. Death happens to the rich, to the poor, to the wise, and the foolish alike. Remember last week we were looking in the book of Proverbs, and we talked about how the book of Proverbs would have different characters in it. You know, the virtuous or the wicked or the rich or the poor or the wise or the fool. And all of those, no matter what category you might put yourself in or God may put you in, we all have one common destiny, is all of us, our lives will end at some point. And so this is the overall subject matter. I guess you could call it an existential book, in that it talks about your very existence, if you want to use a big word and sound smart. So I can sound smart, even though I'm not smart. But so now we'll go to the next one here, the literary style and structure. This is a little bit of review from the past weeks here. This book is considered one of the poetry books, a wisdom book. And so we're in the midst of those at this time. Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes. Those are wisdom/poetry books. The word meaningless, or if you have the King James, vanity, that concept of life under the sun. It's just everything we do under the sun. What does it even mean? It's all nothing. It adds up to nothing. Meaningless, that word, or vanity, it's a translation of the Hebrew word hebel, and it literally means breath or vapor. You know, these things are just like a breath or a vapor. Can you think of another time in the Bible that compares life to a breath or a vapor? There's a verse in the New Testament. I think you know what I'm talking about here, the book of James. And I'm going to read it from the King James Version because it uses the word vapor. Whereas you know not what shall be on the morrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time, then vanisheth away. So that idea of everything under the sun is just a vapor. It's here and it's gone. The stuff we worry about, the stuff we fret over, it's here and it's gone. Now, there is a misinterpretation that is often done with this book of Ecclesiastes. Some people view the message of Ecclesiastes as hedonistic or fatalistic. In other words, the idea of it's just encouraging you to go out and just party, and because you're going to die anyway, and there's because you hear all the thing, everything under the sun is meaningless, but they don't take into account the key verse we just read. Here is the conclusion of the matter. There is one thing that isn't meaningless: serve the Lord in your life. So that's a misinterpretation. It's not about hedonism or being a fatalist or something like that. So let's get into the outline, because we got 2 books to get through tonight. So the second one is not as long here. So here's the outline of Ecclesiastes. So we'll go through this. The first, we have the introduction of Ecclesiastes. That's chapter 1, verses 1 through 11. So the preacher begins by introducing his topic. And I'll read to you Ecclesiastes 1:2. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. That's encouraging, isn't it? So from here, he uses 2 illustrations to connect to this meaninglessness. Okay, this whole thing. Here's some things that are meaningless. Humanity's work is meaningless. Verse 3, what do people gain for all their labors at which they toil under the sun? The endless cycles of activities that we are involved in end up just meaningless. What has been will be again, and what has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. It was funny, before COVID hit, we had this running joke in our house. You kind of get into a cycle of life, and I remember about January and February when we would be running up to plan the Central Ohio Bean Dinner that takes place in March, or my wife would say, well, it's that time again, circles of life and seasons of life, and then we would come around May, starting to plan for vacation Bible school. We'd have that every year in June, and Linda would say, well, look, you're doing VBS, seasons of life, ready for that again. So or we get ready for school, and so all the seasons of life, endless cycles of activity. Solomon says, in the end, what does it come to? It's all just a breath. It's here and it's gone. Now, Solomon, for the next 11 chapters here, or 10 chapters, I should say, goes into a series of investigations and discoveries. He is trying to find meaning. Another way you could look at this is you have a deductive and an inductive sermon. If you're preaching, a deductive sermon is this. You get up, you say your point, and then you go through, here's why this is all true. This is my main point, and here's why this is all true. An inductive sermon is the reverse of that. You make all of these cases for things, and you get all these illustrations, and it's all coming down to the point. You're inductive into this point, and that's what this is. It's an inductive sermon here. And so now he's going to investigate all the areas of life and make some conclusions from this. So he investigates knowledge and human achievement. Let me just read a few of these here. Ecclesiastes 1, beginning in verse 12. I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I applied my mind to study and explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. What a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I've experienced much of wisdom and of knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. Wow, what a conclusion that is. And then he focuses on amusement. Well, maybe I'll just entertain myself here. I'll get an Xbox or do what I'll just get videos. I'll watch Netflix all the time, or whatever it might be. In Ecclesiastes 2, beginning in verse 10, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for my toil. Yet when I surveyed all my hands had done, and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind, nothing gained, and here's that phrase, under the sun. And then he talked about wisdom in chapter 2, beginning in verse 15. Then I said to myself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said to myself, this too is meaningless. For the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die. This is a really encouraging read here, isn't it? And then he applied himself to work. If you can just give a lot of work, you're going to find meaning in life through this. Chapter 2, verse 22 and 23. What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving for which they labor under the sun? All the days their work is grief and pain. Even at night, their minds do not rest. This too is meaningless or vanity. Then I say, well, you know what? I'm just going to be a social butterfly. I'm just going to put my mind into relationships and just, I'm a people person, I'm going to party, we're going to have fun there. And Ecclesiastes 4:4, and I saw all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Now, in Ecclesiastes 4, verses 9 through 12, there is just a little bit of you call this a paragraph here. It's used a lot in weddings, but I could call it parentheses, that is, not a paragraph. And it's the passage of the cord of three strands. The cord of three strands is not quickly broken. Oftentimes that is used in wedding ceremonies, the three strands representing the husband, the wife, and God woven together in a marriage relationship. But then down in verses 15 and 16 of chapter 4, I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before them, but those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. And then we have kind of a parenthesis here. It's a statement about being faithful to God. And so it's a little bit of a departure from investigating all of these things. In chapter 5, verse 4, when you make a vow to God, do not delay to fulfill it. He has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill your vows. It is better not to make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth lead you into sin. So then he investigated trusting in the king, or you could say trusting in government. Okay, if we just have the right government or the right king or the right president, or whatever it might be. In Ecclesiastes 5, beginning in verse 8. If you see the poor oppressed in a district and justice and rights denied, do not be surprised at such things. For one official is eyed by a higher one, and over them both are others higher still. The increase from the land is taken by all. The king himself profits from the fields. Again, the idea, he's just pointing to the meaninglessness or the vaporous nature of life. Then riches. Whoever loves money, Ecclesiastes 5:10, whoever loves money never has enough. Remember that old quote? I think it was one of the Rockefellers, how much money is enough? Just a little bit more, right? Whoever loves money, wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is what? Meaningless. Then thought, well, let's just examine, maybe we can find some fulfillment in nostalgia. You know, where you just kind of look back and let's look back at some of the good old days, and we just kind of remember some things and just kind of lose ourselves in good memories. But Solomon says in Ecclesiastes 7:10, do not say, why were the old days better than these? For it is not wise to ask such questions. He's trying to find meaning in something here. Goes on to the unfairness of life. He just talks about this. Again, this is not necessarily where he's applying himself and enjoying all these things. He's just making an observation here. Ecclesiastes 8:14. There is something else meaningless that occurs on earth. The righteous who get what the wicked deserve, and the wicked who get what the righteous deserve. This too, I say, is meaningless. So, what good does it do if you're going to be righteous? Then, so he's asking these questions here. And then he makes the point again that life is just temporary. Ecclesiastes 9:10. For whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, for in the realm of the dead, where you are going, there is neither working, nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom. Understand, it's all going away. It all goes back in the box. And this life, no matter how many years physically we live, one day it's going to go away like a vapor. Now, we get to another section. It's the section of admonitions. And this is Ecclesiastes 11:7 through 12:8. And so here are some of the admonitions that Solomon gives. First one is, enjoy life as a gift from God while you are young. So Ecclesiastes 11:9, you who are young, be happy while you are young, and let your heart give you joy in the days of your youth. Follow the ways of your heart and whatever your eyes see, but know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. So it's just saying, live your life and enjoy it, but live it with eternity in mind. And so there's some admonitions coming in here. He's I like to use the thing, he's circling the airport. He's getting ready to get down on the runway and make this final point here. So now the next admonition is to realize that there is an aging process. Now, seeing as I just had some dental work done and had a crown put on here, and I keep looking at this, if you read this is symbolic of what the aging process is like. Now, I know all you young people on Zoom, you won't be able to identify with this, but and all of us youthful people here, none of us will be able to identify with any of these things here. So, but well, let me just read this. This is Ecclesiastes 12, 2 through 8. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come, and the years approach when you say, I find no pleasure in them. Now you can see, I think this is symbolic of just what happens in the aging process. Before the sun and light and the moon and the stars grow dark, and the clouds return after the rain, when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men stoop, when the grinders cease because they are few. That means you're having dental trouble there. And those looking through the windows grow dim, your eyesight there. When the doors of the street are closed and the sound of grinding fades, when people rise up at the sound of birds, but their songs grow faint. In other words, you wake up way early in the morning and then your hearing starts to go. When people are afraid of heights, you lose your confidence in dangers in the streets. When the almond tree blossoms and the grasshopper drags itself along and desire is no longer stirred, and people go to their eternal home and mourners go about the street, remember him before the silver cord is severed and the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring and the wheel broken at the well, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless. And that word means a lot more when you think of it in terms of it's just a vapor. It's like steam. You know, we live and it's gone. So then we come down to the conclusion of the matter, and I think we're going to have time to get through the next book here. The conclusion of the matter is simply this. Ecclesiastes 12, 13, and 14. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. So what are the applications we can make from this? And I'm just going to make one application for this if you want to fill this in on your little outline there. The best life is not one that is lived under the sun, but one that is lived under the sun. So Solomon came to that conclusion. So instead of under the sun, S-O-N, and that is living for the Lord. So now you need to buckle up for this next book here. So the next book is the Song of Solomon here. So we'll get to this. Let me zoom in here for you people at home so you can see a little more here. Song of Solomon is the 22nd book. It has 8 chapters in it. It's wisdom and poetry. It's kind of a unique book here, and this is the outline here of this. It's basically they just put it into 2 sections here. I have a few more that I use my own. The Bride and Groom and the Poem of Romantic Love. And so people wonder, what does this mean, and why is this in the Bible, and what's this all about? So let's just go through this. And first of all, here is a key verse from Song of Solomon. It's Song of Solomon 8:7. Many waters cannot quench love, rivers cannot sweep it away. If one were to give all the wealth of one's house for love, it would utterly be scorned. So since this is a book about love, and it's about marriage, and there's romance in here, I probably ought to have a violin just playing romantic music through this whole thing here. So let me just go through this, and we'll go through and see what we can learn from this. The Song of Solomon, the name and the author. The Hebrew name is Shur HaShirim. That's easier for me to say, meaning Song of Songs. Solomon identifies himself in the first verse as the author of this. So, let's just stop here and ask a question that I think may be on your mind here. How could Solomon be qualified to write about the virtues of a monogamous love when he had 700 wives and 300 concubines? Not a bad question, right? So, many scholars feel that this relationship with the Shulamite was the only pure romance that Solomon experienced. And again, this is not excusing, his life and his decisions, but many of those marriages were not really marriages in a sense that we would think of them. They were political arrangements. But this marriage also, many scholars believe it was before his plunge into immorality. So his plunge into immorality. And so this was maybe written before that time. So, that is a little bit of a mystery there. But it is here for the scriptures for us to look at it. And how do we interpret this? Now, there are several ways that people have looked at this book over the years. They read it and some people say, well, this is an allegory. It is not to be taken literally, meaning it is a parable of God's love for Israel. And because it has all these romantic types of imagery in this and intimate images in here, that we're not to take this literally, but this is supposed to be just a parable about God's love, and we look at it that way. Some look at it as what you would call a type, and that's a literary term. It can be taken literally, but also serves as a spiritual picture of our marriage relationship with God. A New Testament example of this would be Ephesians chapter 5. Paul talks about the relationship between a husband and wife, and then at the end he says, well, I'm talking about this, and this is true, but I'm also talking about the relationship between Christ and his church. And he's making that example. And so some see the book of Solomon as a type. Some see the book of Solomon as written, it's intended to be a drama. It's three characters performing a primitive play. The maiden, faithful to her lover, spurns wealthy Solomon's advances. And so you've got some characters there doing this. And then some look at it as satire. And that is it's the idea of a drama, except for it's more of a bite into Solomon's rejection. There's a point here where he is rejected by the bride for a time, and I don't know if I really go with this. And then others, it's just literal, the love of two actual people, Solomon and the Shulamite, and it was just in poetic form. I think you can take some allegory out of this, of course. I think generally you could go somewhere between allegory and literal there. That's just my personal view on this. So those are the interpretations. You can look at it as just symbolic, or you can look at it as literally a little bit of a love story here. So the language, I would say it's sometimes it's very sexual at times, but it's never crass or anything like that. Solomon uses richly symbolic, highly figurative expressions, and it focuses on the key thoughts and feelings that these images portray. And so all the expressions reflect an ancient culture in which we are very unfamiliar. Where you're comparing your bride's teeth to sheep and things like this. It's just so we won't be reading a lot from this, but I think we can go through the outline of just kind of how it plays out here. So here's the outline. This is very romantic, all right? So here we go. First of all, it starts with the courtship. That's chapter 1, verse 2 through chapter 3, verse 5. So the song, it opens with the woman longing for her beloved, and the first two chapters and the first part of chapter 3 are just a dialogue between the man and the woman. So here's some key themes in here. So the woman feels insecure about her desirability. Solomon offers her jewelry only to enhance her beauty. Their love blossoms as the spring. And the woman fears losing her beloved in this here. So there's the courtship, as they're courting one another. Then you have the wedding. So ancient weddings began with the groom leading a procession to the bride's home. And you even see this symbolism in some of what Jesus would talk about keeping your lamps, the virgins that were keeping their lamps lit, waiting for the bride to come. And even that imagery, we are the bride of Christ. We are awaiting the return of the bridegroom, which is Christ. So that is a symbolic of that. Then the groom praises the bride's appearance. Then desire is expressed for one another in flowery language. The groom delights in his bride's purity. And then you have the consummation of their love. And so you have the wedding, the courtship and the wedding. And then you have the maturing marriage. You get into marriage, and the first thing that happens, there's a little bit of a problem here. There seems to be a little bit of indifference to the spouse, or maybe there's just wondering if they still love each other. And then there's a reconciliation in this marriage, and they begin bonding again, physically and emotionally. And then there's the passionate exchange. The groom admires his bride, and she desires to be with her husband. And then there's a public expression of their affection and their love for each other. And so then we have some closing comments about true love. I always I keep thinking about that movie, The Princess Bride, and there's a wedding scene in there where the preacher goes, "True love," and every time I see that, I think about that. But so let me just read to you from Song of Solomon, chapter 8, verses 6 through 7. Place me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm, for love is as strong as death, its jealousy unyielding as the grave. It burns like blazing fire, like a mighty flame. Many waters cannot quench love, rivers cannot sweep it away. If one were to give all the wealth of one's house for love, it would be utterly scorned. So, here are some applications here, or here's just some main themes here, and if you want to jot these down, that we can gain from this. First of all, God created love to be stronger than death. Now, these are all coming from the passage we just read there. God created love to be stronger than death. True love cannot be pushed away. True love cannot be bought with money. And true love continues to grow. So I'll go through those so you have time to write those down there. God created love to be stronger than death. Love cannot be pushed away. True love cannot be bought with money. True love continues to grow. So one of the reasons I believe this is in the Scripture is one of the attributes of God is His love. As a matter of fact, in 1 John 4, we learn God is love. And God created love, God created marriage, and I believe that it is celebrated in this book of Song of Solomon here. And so I want to conclude with what the New Testament has to say about true love and the true love of God and the true love that we have for one another. 1 John 4, 7 through 10. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God, and everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed His love among us. He sent His one and only Son into the world that we might live through Him. This is love, not that we loved God, but that He loved us and sent His Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. That is what the Bible truly teaches about love, and at the end of the day, that's where all the messages of the gospel, Old Testament and New Testament, pointing to the gospel, point to this idea that God is love, and the ultimate demonstration of love was on the cross when Jesus gave his life for you and for me.